Welcome to Deloitte's Debriefs Webcast Tax Series in Asia Pacific. Our webcast today is from our indirect tax series and is titled Tackling EU CBAM's Impact to Structure Sustainable Supply Chain. My name is Lily Lee, and I'm a tax partner based in Deloitte, China. I have the pleasure of hosting today's webcast. I have two speakers with me today, Dolly Zhang and Roger Chen. Dolly is a tax partner. Roger is a tax director. They are both based in Deloitte, China. You may access our bios on the left side of the screen. Before we introduce the agenda for today's webcast, we'd like to take a moment to highlight some of the features of a webcast console. First, all users are on listen-only mode. If you have any content-related questions, you can submit at any time in the Q&A box at the bottom right of the screen. We will do our best to respond to your questions during the presentation. Second, all PC users can maximize or minimize each box at your convenience during the webcast. You may also explore the icons at the bottom of the screen. If you want to download today's slides and the related publications, please go to the Downloads and the Links box. On the other hand, mobile device users can view the slides and answer the survey on screen. Also, if you require an attendance record for this event, you will receive an automated email with CPE certificate after watching for 15 minutes. Since 1990s, driven by the United Nations Climate Governance Action, the issue of climate change has gradually evolved into a political issue of global concern and officially entered the international vision. The signing of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992 and the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 laid the basic framework and the legal foundation for greenhouse gas emission reduction in the international community. Since 1995, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, also called COP, have been held in December every year. And on December 12, 2015, 178 member countries of the 21st COP signed the Paris Agreement. The long-term goal of this agreement is to control the rise of the global average temperature within 1.5 degrees Celsius compared with the pre-industrialization period, and strive to limit the rise of the temperature within 2 degrees Celsius. The EU has been committed to promoting climate control and management worldwide, and the EU countries as a whole achieved a carbon peak in 1990. The EU carbon emissions trading system, EU ETS, was officially implemented on January 1st, 2005. Now, it is the largest and the longest running carbon market in the world. In recent years, the EU has been promoting a new Green Deal, including a carbon border adjustment mechanism. It authorized the EU to collect carbon tariff from extra-EU exporters in certain scenarios, which will significantly impact the international trade pattern, and multinational companies should consider to restructure a more sustainable supply chain. So based on the above background, in today's debrief, we will mainly focus on CBAM and the relevant sustainable supply chain, including an overview of EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, the potential impact to extra-EU exporters, sustainable supply chain restructure, followed by a Q&A session. Our webcast today will then come to an end. Next page, please. Before we start the webinar, we have a small polling question for you. Let's see the question on the screen. What sales amount proportion of your products will be exported to the European Union market? Lower than 5%, 5 to 50%, 50 to 100%. Our manufacturing center is in European Union. Don't know or not applicable. While we are waiting for the result, I have a question to Roger. According to the recent report in the internet, Germany's ruling coalition plans to cancel its goal of realizing carbon neutrality before 2035. It seems a major drawback for EU's plan to realize carbon neutrality. What's your thought on this news? Hello, Roger.
Yes, Lily. I saw it as well. This news is widely spread on the internet, and I believe especially in Chinese environment. And many people characterize it, and they're suspicious for the ambition of EU on carbon neutrality. However, this is a rumor or some maybe some wrong interpretation. First of all, Germany never planned to realize carbon neutrality before 2035. According to Germany's new climate change objective released in last May, it plans to reach carbon neutrality in 2045. So Germany remains the biggest supporter for the EU New Green Deal. And what might be changed is the energy policy. Germany will continue generating electricity from coal in the future. Germany planned to stop it from 2013 previously, but Germany has resumed generating more electricity from coal since this June, due to the current military conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So that's my observation, Lily.
Thank you, Roger. Glad to understand the truth. Now let's take a look on the results of the polling question, the feedback from the audience. Hello. Can we see the result for the polling questions? Okay. We can see that lower than 5%. Sorry, let me take a look on the, okay. Lower than 5, there are 12 companies respond that lower than 5%, which represent 20% of the audience, and 30% respond on 5 to 50%, 6% on 50% to 100%, and only 5% of the audience, they mentioned that they have a manufacturing center in European Union. Around 37% responded that they don't know or not applicable. So now it is that today's topic is become important for you. Yeah, since a big portion of the audience respond that don't know or not applicable. Okay, let's start with the first topic. Now I will leave the time for Dolly to introduce the overview of CBAM. Hello, Dolly. Over to you.
Thank you, Lily. I'm glad to provide everyone an introduction to CBAM. CBAM's full name is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It is a part of a wider sustainability agenda of the EU Commission. It is also something that we see developing across the globe. Before going into detail on CBAM and how it would work, we will, first of all, draft a wider picture on sustainability. Sustainable global trade is highly on the agenda of the European Union. The EU Commission has announced the EU Green Deal. They have set a task to reduce the greenhouse gases at least 55% compared to the level of 1990 by the time of 2030. And the EU wants to be climate neutral by 2050. The efforts to reduce the emission will be a great deal. In order to achieve this, the EU Commission presented a plan which is called Fit for 55. And this package consists of 13 proposals which provides a very thorough review of all the existing legislation in the field of climate, energy, transportation, and taxation. One of this proposal in this Fit for 55 package is the introduction of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, so-called CBAM. This mechanism will be an essential part of EU to achieve the objective of a climate neutral by 2050. So I think the question from the audience might be, what is a CBAM indeed? CBAM is a mechanism on the basis of which tax will need to be paid on certain products. When such goods are imported into the EU, tax will be based on the carbon dioxide emission that are embedded in those products. As you can see, because tax will be collected upon importation, we sometimes refer to CBAM as the carbon tariff. However, it is in nature a carbon pricing mechanism, and we will introduce more. Next slide, please. In July 2021, the EU Commission submitted a legislation proposal on the establishment of CBAM, marking the start of the CBAM legislation process. In March 2020, the European Council has reached consensus on the general approach of the CBAM and began negotiation with the EU Parliament. After back and forth discussions, around 1 month ago, on June 22nd, the EU Parliament finally approved the CBAM. So it has been a long process to get the regulation comes out. The CBAM will be formally implemented in the EU from the beginning of 2023. A reporting phase will be arranged till the end of 2026. In other words, there will be a 4-year transition period, during which the importers does not have to pay the carbon tariff upon import, but they do have the reporting liability to file the embedded emission into the EU region. From the beginning of 2027, CBAM will enter into the full implementation phase. That means the importers will have to pay the certificate for their imports into the EU. As we can imagine, it will be a very tight time schedule, only less than 6 months left for preparing for the reporting liability. Next slide, please. As we mentioned before, the nature of CBAM is indeed a carbon pricing mechanism. Today, European companies will need to pay for their carbon dioxide emissions, for their greenhouse gases emission. This laid down the EU Commission trading system, which Lily introduced before. Companies in certain industry sector, for example, steel, chemicals that are producing in the EU will need to pay on their gas emission via the ETS certificates. The EU ETS covers 31 countries, including 27 EU member states, as well as 4 non-EU countries, which is Switzerland, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and the Norway. But one of the problems is that there will be a potential carbon leakage, which means company may moving or relocating their carbon-intensive production to countries with less stringent emission constraints. Currently, around 27% of global carbon dioxide emission from fuel currently comes from international trade of goods. While EU have substantially reduced its domestic greenhouse gas emission, these coming from imports into the EU have been constantly increasing. Therefore, it may undermine the EU's efforts to reduce its global greenhouse gas footprint. And that is why EU has taken the CBAM initiative to make sure that the greenhouse gases emitted for goods that are imported ultimately into the EU will also be properly dealt with. Also, under the CBAM, the carbon tax paid in other countries or regions could be reduced when calculating the EU carbon tariff, which means hopefully it can encourage other countries to establish an effective carbon trading market. In terms of the scope of emission, CBAM is now expanded to include not only the direct emission, but also the indirect emission, which means the emission derived from the electricity used by the manufacturers. And also very important is the scope of goods that are subject to EU CBAM. In addition to the 5 product groups initially proposed by the EU Commission, which is iron and steel, aluminium, electricity, cement, and fertilizer, the EU Parliament also wants the CBAM to cover 4 additional product groups, which are the organic chemicals, plastics, hydrogen, and ammonia products. Of course, to ensure a smooth implementation, organic chemicals and plastics should be subject to a Commission assessment of their technical specification. Also, very importantly, for the country of origin, EU has adopted an identical method in accordance with the EU non-preferential rules of origin. But goods made in Switzerland, Ireland, Liechtenstein, and Norway are excluded from such scope because their carbon emission system is connected with the EU ETS already. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at how CBAM would work. The compliance requirements under the CBAM can be summarized as registration with the central authorities and reporting plus declaration. Firstly, registration. It is very important. The importer will be responsible for the liability of the CBAM. EU allows foreign companies to register as importer in EU. So either a seller in AP countries or a buyer in the EU could register as the import for CBAM purpose. The only difference is which party will ultimately undertake the CBAM liability directly. The importer of the goods subject to the CBAM scope will have to either by itself or through a representative register with the central registrant where they can also buy the CBAM certificate. Secondly, yearly declaration. During the transactional period, the importers who import goods subject to CBAM scope should also perform a reporting obligation. But in the transitional period, the reporting is on a quarterly basis. When CBAM fully come into implementation 4 years later, the affected importer must declare by the end of May each year their quantity of goods, the embedded emission in those goods imported into the EU in the preceding year. For the annual declaration, the in-scope importers must also submit it to CBAM the certificate they have purchased in advance from the authorities. The price of the certificate will be calculated depending on the weekly average auction price of EU ETS allowance. The information on the embedded emission for goods subject to CBAM should be communicated to the importers registered in the EU by the non-EU producers. In case such information is not available upon importation, the EU importer will have to use a default industry value for greenhouse gas emission for each product in order to determine the number of certificates they need to purchase. Because the default value will usually be higher than the actual emission embedded in the imported goods. So the importer who cannot demonstrate the actual emission during the reconciliation procedure might be subject to a higher carbon pricing impact. On the other hand, if a non-EU producer can demonstrate that they have already paid a price of the carbon used in the production of the imported goods in the third country, this corresponding cost can be deducted for the EU importer. As mentioned before, this will hopefully be helpful in facilitating more non-EU countries to set up their own carbon emission trading system, and therefore be helpful for the carbon emission fairness on a worldwide basis. And thank you, Lily. And that is an overview of the CBAM.
Thank you, Dolly. Yeah, for guiding us quickly went through the CBAM. We all understand climate change is a global problem that needs global solution. As the EU raised their own climate ambition and less stringent environmental and climate policies prevail in non-EU countries, there's a strong risk of so-called carbon leakage. Such carbon leakage can shift emission outside of Europe and therefore seriously undermine EU and global climate efforts. The CBAM will equalize the price of carbon between domestic products and imports and ensure that the EU's climate objectives are not undermined by production relocating to countries with less ambitious policies. But in the meantime, although there will be some uncertainties on the final version, the CBAM will definitely have impact to current fragile international trade system. Let's hand over to Roger, and who will share his comments on what's the potential impact to those extra EU exporters from CBAM. Hi, Roger, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lily. So we can see in this page, we have a short summary about the top 10 trade partners of EU in 2021. China and the United States are currently the two largest trading partners of the EU. Actually, China is actively responding to the changes in climate and sustainable development and has set the goal of carbon peak in 2030 and carbon neutrality in 2060. And for US, since the President Biden administration came to power, it has promoted the climate-driven development strategy of full integrating climate policy into the future economic development plan of the United States. So both China and the United States are actively promoters of climate and sustainable development. But the exporters or manufacturers in these countries will still subject to maybe have some impact from CBAM in the short term. And then there are 5 European countries in the list: Russia, Britain, Switzerland, Turkey, and Norway. It is expected that due to the regional conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Russia's exports to EU will decline significantly in this year. Maybe some other countries will replace it. And according to Dolly's introduction just now, goods from Switzerland and Norway will be exempted from CBAM, but Britain and Turkey will also be affected. The last 3 countries in this list are from Asia: Japan, South Korea, and India. South Korea has launched the national carbon trading system since 2015, and it's the first trading system in Asia. Japan is planning to establish a national carbon trading market very quickly, and India has announced its carbon neutrality target at 2070. For these 3 countries, the impact of CBAM is different. Less impact maybe to South Korea. Japan will be relatively high. Maybe India will suffer the most. Okay, next page, please. Let's take a look what might be impacted from CBAM. The first one, I think the direct impact from CBAM for those extra EU exporters or manufacturers, most of the financial perspective. The key factors that will finally decide the CBAM certificate purchased by the importers, including the export goods volume, the emission intensity embedded in the goods, the carbon tax paid in a certain country, and the free allowance issued by EU ETS for the similar goods in EU. And to minimize the impact of CBAM, ultimately, the exporter or manufacturer need to invest decarbonization-related equipment and improve its process continuously. Since this investment and improvement will impact the long-term financial data, it needs carefully simulation in advance. For the free allowance issued by EU ETS, it will be phased out by the end of 2032, which is 5 years earlier than the EU Commission's proposal. So with the continuous tightening of the EU free allowance in past a few years, the average price of carbon emission in EU ETS has already been doubled in 2021, and it can be seen that in the future the price of CBAM certificates with the especially with the phase out of the free allowance, the price will definitely increase year by year. But currently, there are still a lot of uncertainties in the implementation of CBAM. For example, how the EU authority to verify the emission intensity declared by the importer, especially for some new items. There are a lot of uncertainties in this area. So it will increase difficulties for accurate simulation at current stage, but a close monitor on the policy change is suggested, so the exporter manufacturer can adjust its strategy very quickly. Next page, please. Yeah, and CBAM will also increase the compliance cost of the importer or maybe the manufacturer. As mentioned before, the importer should first register to CBAM authority in advance and yearly declare its emission as well. If a number of CBAM certificates corresponding to the emission in the imported goods of the previous year are not submitted to the authority, or false information is submitted to the authority, a penalty will be levied, and its amount should be 3 times of the average price of the CBAM. And the outstanding quantity of CBAM certificates still should be purchased by the importer. It is very interesting that many countries believe that EU's CBAM is contrary to the basic principle of WTO, and maybe the principle of the common but differentiated responsibility in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So many countries also suggest that WTO should further review the CBAM before its implementation. But from the enterprise's perspective, it's very hard to move the decision from EU now. So a detail, maybe a scope, a SOP for the extra EU exporters should be established quickly to ensure all the compliance requirements from CBAM could be met and avoid any potential in-compliance activities during the declaration. Okay, next page, please. Nowadays, for exporters outside the EU, especially for those developing countries, price advantage is the main driving force for their products to enter the European market. The implementation of CBAM may overturn the market advantage accumulated by these exporters in just one night. Enterprises so need to re-examine their product strategies. Enterprise might have to give up the EU market due to the uncontrollable cost but that could be only a solution in the short term, but might not be a wise approach for a long term. As a matter of fact, enterprises can reduce more or less impact of CBAM by adjusting the positioning of their products. Enterprises need to improve the brand positioning of their main products in the market, increase investment in R&D, and or use some new materials, technologies, or new energies, which can effectively reduce carbon emission. But similar investment in a short time will inevitably increase the cost of enterprises. So the enterprises need to plan investment and other resources from a longer term perspective to form a technical barrier as soon as possible. And another important point is to educate the end customer in the market and let them understand the high price paid by them will be worse for a more friendly environment. Based on a survey conducted by Deloitte, compared with 2 years ago, as of March 2022, the proportion of consumers purchasing sustainable goods or service in more than 12 countries regions have continuously decreased. That might be relevant to the average revenue decrease due to the COVID-19 situation, but as long as the market's recognition of low carbon and environmental friendly products is further improved, the enterprise could have a large market share and increase its profit accordingly. The next page. And CBAM will finally impact the exporter on the manufacturer's supply chain. Differentiate with European Commission's proposal, just like Dolly mentioned, EP, the European Parliament enlarged the scope of CBAM from direct emission to indirect emission. So for the extra EU exporters, if finally the European Parliament's proposal would be finally approved, the enterprise may not only manage its own emission, but also the emission from the suppliers in the supply chain. So that's why in recent years, the concept of sustainable supply chain has been paid more and more attention in the business community. The United Nations Global Compact, UNGC, defines supply chain sustainability as the management of environmental, social, and economic impacts and the promotion of good governance practices throughout the life cycle of goods and services. So from CBAM's perspective, an extra EU exporter should consider to restructure its supply chain to include all the sustainable targets. But since most of the targets might have conflict with, cost or efficiency, it is a very challenge to achieve sustainable in a real sense, especially for multinational companies. So that's the impact from CBAM. Back to you, Lily.
Thanks, Roger, for sharing about the impact about the CBAM. Before we move to the next part sharing, let's make the second polling question. What's the major obstacle to build up a sustainable supply chain in your industry? Capital investment, human resource, technical reservation, partnership with suppliers and customers. Don't know, not applicable. While waiting for the result, I have a question to Dolly. Hello, Dolly. Could you please generally introduce the current emission price in different carbon trade markets?
Sure, Lily. This is a good question because affected by the factors that the attitude towards the carbon emission, the level of the scientific and technological development, there are great differences in both the trading volume and prices of the main carbon trading markets all over the world. I'll give you two examples. Take the EU ETS as an example. It accounts for 90% of the global trade volume, and its total amount have reached the 683 billion euros in 2021. The price for each ton of carbon emission is around 80 euros, while for China, the national carbon trade market, the largest price for each ton of carbon emission is only around 8 euro, 1/10 of the price of the EU ETS. Therefore, there could be a big variance. Back to you, Lily.
Thank you, Dolly. Okay, let's take a look at the results of the polling question 2. Okay, 15% respond on capital investment, 6.2% on human resource, technical reservation 0%. Okay, 21% responded on partnership with suppliers and customers, and 42% on all above. Okay. So it seems there are many obstacles for building the sustainable supply chains. Okay, let's move to the next part. Hi, Roger. As you mentioned, sustainable supply chain would be more and more important for multinational company. Would you please elaborate more about how to restructure the supply chain to fulfill the requirement from the CBAM?
Okay, Lily. As always, the goal of the supply chain is to better meet the needs of downstream customers. Therefore, all departments in the supply chain, no matter external department or internal department, needed to move forward along the same big goal and form as a whole. Traditionally, supply chain strategy or management method like lean manufacturer is to strive to remove all unnecessary waste so the efficiency and the effective of the supply chain could be maximized. The management is always in a cycle of identify risk, identify waste, evaluating them, improving, implementing, and monitoring for each node of the supply chain. I believe that could be also workable in the context of sustainable supply chain, but the definition of waste or risk could be totally different between the traditional supply chain and the sustainable supply chain. We can take decarbonization as an example. To reach the requirement of CBAM, an extra EU manufacturer should strive to lower its emission in the whole life cycle of the product. For the emission embedded in the goods to be exported, the enterprise may conduct an industry benchmark study to understand the gap with the best practice in the industry and to evaluate the potential benefits. And if we follow this practice, what resource might be needed to make the improvement? If the benchmark shows the actual emission is higher than a result of the reasonable range, that there could be a waste or risk. So manufacturers should usually need a root cause analysis to understand the reason and if there's any solution. Maybe a strategic decarbonization path will be planned in advance, and after the improvement for each step, the company should keep monitoring whether there is a better result. To follow above risk management cycle, internal structure may be changed. SOP, job responsibility might be updated. A new KPI metric might be needed to evaluate. And on the basis of balancing the three major goals of economy, society, and the environment in a sustainable supply chain, there are some sub-goals like cost, efficiency, lead time, compliance, etc. Some technical approaches are also be helpful to improve the gap compared with CBAM requirement in the whole supply chain. Next page, please. I have listed some ones here in this page, but due to the time limit, I just share some examples, but not go through all of them one by one. The first one I would introduce is the certified supplier. In the procurement process, the certification of green suppliers and the relevant qualification of suppliers will become more and more important, such as ISO 14064, the greenhouse gas certification, which is a standard launched by the International Organization for Standardization in 2006. As a practical tool for the monitoring, reporting, and verification of greenhouse gases, ISO 14064 is applied to enterprises to manage greenhouse gas emission and elimination, and will increase the transparency of the upstream and the supply chain. Another example might be the onshore procurement. With the continuous rise of international oil price and the instability of regional political and economic situation, more and more companies will give priority to supplies in the same region to shorten the physical distance. Uh, so the logistic cost and the lead time could be more controllable. And another example is centralization or outsourcing some non-core businesses to other third parties is also a trend we observed in the supply chain management. A lot of multinational companies will set up what we call delivery center or something like that to centralize its supporting functions like HR, tax, compliance in a certain maybe a low cost area to support the business in a large region, or even maybe to outsource such functions to a third parties, and the third party can provide a similar service to multiple companies to form scale effects. Next page, please. And we all know digital technology plays a very important role in supporting the supply chain. In recent years, a large number of new technologies has been introduced into the field of supply chain, especially for some large scale manufacturing resource planning systems, which integrates a lot of different functions of enterprises. But back to the sustainable supply chain, or accurately to the field of CBAM, enterprises will still encounter many challenges, such as how to measure more accurately and in a real time, how to find a measurement technology most suitable for the company's own situation in a variety of measurement methods, how to better analyze and display the collected data, and so on. And in some cases, maybe some high-end technology is needed, such as how to capture and storage the carbon is needed for some very special industries. In fact, Deloitte is also very actively engaged in the digital transformation in the field of carbon emission. We have a considerable number of digital products that can help our clients better manage issues related to the carbon emission. Taking CBAM as an example. On one hand, we have some small tools that can roughly estimate the carbon footprint of products exported to the EU based on the export information of enterprises, so as to help enterprises um, to make a preliminary assessment of the impact of CBAM. On the other hand, we also have some systematical software which can help our enterprises to achieve a series of work from the upstream and downstream information and the declaration, and also help the declaration of CBAM enterprises to the purchase of verification of the certificate in the future through the cloud modeling. So we are happy to discuss if any service request in this area. The use of this digital products will effectively help enterprises improve the management efficiency in the field of CBAM and realize accurate and intelligent management. Okay, That's some general introduction about sustainable supply chain restructure from CBAM's perspective. Over to you, Lily.
Thanks, Roger. It looks there are a lot of things we need to do about our supply chain in order to meet the requirement of CBAM. Although climate and sustainable development will have an important impact on the sustainable supply chain construction for a long time in the future, I believe everyone there will be also agree that the sustainable supply chain development faced by enterprises today is far more than CBAM, and there are other points should be considered and planned in advance. So next, Dolly will share some comments about the other considerations. So many other comments, other factors other than the climate change will also have an impact on the sustainable supply chain. I will just name a few. Geopolitical, I believe, is one of the most important factors for management to consider. For example, the ongoing Sino-US trade tension from 2018, the United States used Section 301 of the trade law to impose special tariff on most goods originating in China. Although with the Phase 1 agreement between the two countries, some goods have been removed from the retaliation tariff list, the overall impact is still significant and beyond the two countries alone. Many Chinese companies are considering setting up their factories outside of China, for example, in the AP or in the Southern American, as an adjustment to the supply chain to avoid the retaliation tariff impact. In the early 2020, it is said that the Biden administration was considering removing the special tariff policy on China. However, from the recent progress, it seems that still a long shot. Of course, there are also some good trends in terms of the field of geopolitical. For example, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which has been officially implemented in the region since the beginning of this year. RCEP is the largest free trade agreement in the world at present. Through relevant tariff reduction arrangement, over 90% tariff on goods originating from the member countries in the 15 Asia-Pacific countries will be reduced to zero. Enterprises can make full use of RCEP when restructuring their supply chain in the APEC region. The world is still facing various unexpected changes. For example, COVID remains a challenge to the supply chain. Change of market needs, business environment is also a critical factor. There's a saying that in the current world, the only thing unchanged is the change itself. That is why we would need resilience in terms of how to manage and structure the supply chain. Next slide, please. So what would be Deloitte's recommendation on the supply chain structuring in the new area? Firstly, we will suggest everyone should keep abreast of both global and local policy, which is the basis for the supply chain arrangement. Geopolitical factor and business environment will have a great impact on the company's supply chain. And understanding of the policy trend will help for companies to identify risks and develop mitigation factors in advance. In some countries, company can also use its communication channel with the government to escalate or reflect some industry-wide problems with the senior government officials in order to realize a more positive policy. Secondly, in order to increase the competitiveness of the supply chain, company can also adopt a dynamic network with more risk visibility and operational flexibility. Thirdly, enterprises can establish a future-oriented supply chain network capabilities to achieve more flexible customer services, better supply quality, and stronger supply sustainability. In fact, the design of a supply chain network will be guided by those capacities rather than the traditional physical signs and functions. Next, and also very important, is a deep cooperation between the upstream and downstream of the supply chains. Nowadays, it has become an important success factor. Enterprise will need to discuss with their upstream and downstream partners in the research and development process to determine the performance of future products, processing of technology, packaging, distribution channel, and even after-sale service, so as to realize the agility of the supply chain. Last but not least, a third-party professional company can always be a very useful external resource to leverage. Next slide, please. And this leads to a introduction on what Deloitte offer in the field of supply chain. As the world's largest professional service firm, Deloitte has the ability to provide a package service including advisory, implementation, and operation. We offer end-to-end solutions on CBAM and relevant supply chain restructure, from the current situation analysis and strategic review to the improvement and evaluation of the optimized scenario. We can also cover many different dimensions, such as project funding, financing, supplier partner capabilities, emission trade, etc. During the implementation phase, we can support review or draft a SOP to standardize the procedure for our client and to apply special government funding or rebate for new energy or apply for certain certificates such as the zero emission factory, etc. from the government. As for the daily operation, Deloitte do leverage our delivery center in different regions to undertake a non-core business from our client and work as a third party to trace the carbon emission in the supply chain and report to relevant authorities accordingly. We do have a great amount of digital assets in the field of supply chain and carbon-related areas, which will help our clients to quickly equipped with digitalization and automation. We are happy to support if you do have any questions in this area. Back to you, Lily.
Thanks, Dolly. We have finished all of our sharing today, and next, we are going to answer some submitting questions. Okay, let's pick up one question. Can importer sell the CBAM certificate after buying it? If the importer doesn't need such quantity of the certificate? Okay, could Dolly answer this question?
Sure, Lily, I'll take it because it's an interesting question. So according to the CBAM, the pricing method of the CBAM depending on a weekly average auction price of the EU carbon allowance. That is to say, the price of the CBAM certificate is not at a fixed price. With the continuous tightening of EU free allowance, the average price of EU carbon quotation has risen all the way. So maybe some importers will consider, should I purchase a great amount of certificate in advance and whereby the price increase, I maybe can resell it to other importers in the markets. But I have to say this is not workable under the current CBAM regulation. The CBAM certificates can only be used for the payment of the carbon emission of the imported goods by the company itself, and it cannot be traded in the market. The overpurchase certificate by the importers can be sold back to the CBAM registrant authorities before the end of June each year, and the remaining certificate will have to be removed from the importer's record after that time. Thank you, Lily.
Thanks, Dolly. Okay, let's pick up another question. Roger.
Hello, Lily. You can you repeat the question? Maybe I will select a question by myself. Maybe. Okay, I see a question about. Can you please elaborate more about the CBAM 2 Deloitte has? Okay, I will answer this question. Okay, the major target of our CBAM 2 is to automatically calculate the carbon emission embedded in the goods from a certain manufacturer. So to reach this target before the implementation, our professionals team will have to fully understand the good itself, and maybe what's the major raw material it is, how it will be manufactured, and Deloitte actually has a database to record relevant carbon emission model in different industries. We can either choose a similar model in the database to calculate the emission, or maybe if it's a very special model, special one, we can have a very special design a special model to these goods, and worked with different data capture equipment. The two can display the carbon emission report in a real time. So we can run a demo after the webinar if you are interested in this too. Okay, thanks. I saw Lily, you come back. Back over to you, Lily.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, that's fortunately is all we have time for. Thank you to all of you who go to join us. We will encourage you to fill out the short that will pop up on your screen momentarily and tell us what you think about today's program. If you joined us late, please know that this presentation will be archived for future viewing. If you feel that others benefit from this webcast, share the webcast via the share this icon and have them visit. We will respond to all the questions submitted to the webcast in advance. Also, you think to reach our students, we will to you. Don't forget to turn in the webcast from Indirect Tax series on August 20, titled Digital Trade in Singapore and Malaysia, Implementation and Moving Forward. From all of us at Deloitte, thank you for your participation in Deloitte's Asia Pacific Tech today. Say goodbye.